This is when Gen X ruled the multiplex, where I look at the films that shaped the MTV generation. Today, I'm looking at 1986's Blue Velvet, which was written and directed by David Lynch. Lynch first made his name with the surreal and experimental 1977 independent film Eraserhead, then moved into the big leagues in 1984 with his big-budget adaptation of Frank Herbert's Dune. Blue Velvet is the first film Lynch made after the critical and commercial failure of Dune, and it is often regarded as one of the greatest films of the 80s. We open in the fictional logging town of Lumberton. To the opening strains of Bobby Vinton's hit rendition of Blue Velvet from 1963, we see a montage of small-town Americana. White picket fences, blue skies, smiling firemen. A man waters his lawn, then has some kind of attack and collapses. The camera moves down beneath the grass and reveals all the writhing insects living beneath the soil. Like many of Lynch's works, Blue Velvet is all about what lies beneath the surface, and it's also about the balance and friction between opposites. Light and dark, innocence and corruption, things that exist out in the open and things that are kept hidden. In Lynch's universe, you can't have sunlight and flowers and green grass without also having darkness and swarming insects. A college student named Jeffrey Beaumont returns to his hometown of Lumberton to visit his hospitalized father, who's the man who collapsed in the opening scene. Jeffrey is played by Kyle MacLachlan, who'd starred in Lynch's adaptation of Dune and who would go on to become a pop culture icon as Agent Cooper in Lynch's 1990-1991 ABC TV series Twin Peaks. After visiting his father, Jeffrey takes a walk in a wooded area and comes across a severed human ear. He takes it to the police station and gives it to Detective Williams, a family friend who is played by George Dickerson. That night, Jeffrey drops by Detective Williams's home, hoping for an update in the case, and meets his wife, who is played by Peyton Place star Hope Lange. Detective Williams refuses to leak any information about the case. As Jeffrey is leaving, he's confronted by Detective Williams's teen daughter Sandy, who is played by Laura Dern, then best known for the 1985 drama Mask. From eavesdropping on her father's conversations, Sandy knows that the missing ear has a possible link to an ongoing police investigation involving a nightclub singer named Dorothy Valens, who lives in an apartment building nearby. Curious about the ear, Jeffrey picks up Sandy after school. Even though Blue Velvet is set in the present, or at least in 1986, everything about Lumberton has a very old-fashioned feel. The cars, decor, and outfits harken back to the 1940s and 1950s. Some of that is because Lynch is quite clearly playing around with film noir elements. Blue Velvet features a protagonist who is drawn into corruption by a femme fatale in a society teeming with darkness and violence, and film noir flourished in the 40s and 50s. Also, we tend to think of the 1950s as a shorthand for Innocence, and Lynch is playing around with our preconceptions, as short-sighted as they may be, by making Lumberton look as outwardly innocent as possible. Jeffrey takes Sandy to a diner to sell her on a scheme he's cooked up. He's going to disguise himself as an exterminator, and he wants Sandy to pose as a Jehovah's Witness to distract Dorothy while he snoops around her apartment. Sandy thinks this is a terrible idea, which it is, but Jeffrey talks her into it. In his exterminator guise, Jeffrey gains access to Dorothy's apartment. Dorothy is played by Isabella Rossellini, daughter of screen legend Ingrid Bergman and famed director Roberto Rossellini. At the time of Blue Velvet, Rossellini was well known as a model, though she's now famous as an actress and an author. She and David Lynch were romantically paired for many years. While Jeffrey is in Dorothy's apartment, a man in a yellow sport coat drops by. As Dorothy and the man have a furtive conversation, Jeffrey pockets Dorothy's spare set of keys. Jeffrey takes Sandy to the Slow Club, a local lounge, to watch Dorothy perform a slinky rendition of Blue Velvet. They sneak out mid-set to break into Dorothy's apartment while she's thus occupied. Sandy stays outside in Jeffrey's car, promising to honk 4 times to warn him when Dorothy returns. Dorothy comes back while Jeffrey is snooping around, and Sandy honks as promised, but Jeffrey has to answer a call of nature from drinking too much Heineken at the club, and thus fails to hear the honks over the sound of the toilet flushing. Jeffrey hides in Dorothy's closet and watches through the slats in the door as she gets undressed and takes a phone call that upsets her greatly. When Jeffrey accidentally makes a noise, she grabs a kitchen knife, throws open the closet door, and confronts him. Assuming he's a voyeur, Dorothy forces him to get undressed at knife point. She threatens him and sexually abuses him, which it turns out he's sort of into. They're interrupted by an angry knock at the door. In a panic, Dorothy hides Jeffrey in the closet again and urgently warns him to keep quiet. Dorothy's visitor is Frank Booth, an angry, deranged, crude, and violent man played by Easy Rider star and General Wildman Dennis Hopper. Dorothy is clearly terrified of him, as well she should be, because Frank is utterly terrifying. He yells at her and crudely demeans her while inhaling amyl nitrate, then he slaps her around and rapes her while Jeffrey watches from the closet. After Frank leaves, Jeffrey tries to comfort a traumatized Dorothy. She tries to initiate sex, which Jeffrey is into, but she also wants him to hit her, which Jeffrey is very much not into. He gets dressed and leaves after finding a photo of Dorothy with her husband and young son, as well as a copy of her marriage certificate. Jeffrey and Sandy park outside of a church while Jeffrey fills her in on his disturbing night. From Dorothy's conversation with Frank, Jeffrey has gleaned that Frank has kidnapped Dorothy's husband and son and is keeping them hostage in exchange for Dorothy's cooperation. Jeffrey thinks the ear he found belongs to Dorothy's husband. He's shaken to the core by everything he witnessed from the closet, and Sandy comforts him by telling him about an optimistic dream she had in which darkness was conquered by the arrival of robins. It's always helpful to think in terms of opposites while watching Blue Velvet. Sandy, who is blonde and innocent and is first introduced emerging from the darkness into the light, is the opposite of the other key woman in Jeffrey's life, Dorothy, who is a smoldering brunette with a sordid and violent lifestyle. Sandy's ridiculously over-the-top dream about robins that triumph over darkness is all about that friction between opposites. Jeffrey is fascinated by Dorothy and feels a strong pull towards her darkness, so he stops by her apartment the following night and they begin a sexual relationship. While listening to her sing Blue Velvet at the Slow Club, Jeffrey spots Frank Booth in the audience. Jeffrey secretly trails Frank and witnesses him conducting shady business with the man in the yellow jacket, who also conducts shady business with a man with a heavy mustache. It's clear Frank is somehow involved in the drug trade and has murdered someone because of it. As much as Blue Velvet is influenced by film noir, it's also influenced by the teen detective fiction that flourished in the 1940s and 50s. The Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew are the most famous examples, but there were dozens of series with teen protagonists that sprang up around this time. Blue Velvet shows what would happen if one of those squeaky clean teen detectives uncovered his own dark side during the course of solving a mystery. At one point, Sandy tells Jeffrey, "I don't know if you're a detective or a pervert," and Jeffrey doesn't know the answer to that either. Meanwhile, Jeffrey and Sandy spend more and more time together, and even though Sandy has a boyfriend, she and Jeffrey begin to fall in love. Jeffrey still continues his affair with Dorothy, however. Dorothy urges him to hit her during sex, and Jeffrey falls into his dark side and obeys. As Jeffrey is leaving Dorothy's apartment, they're discovered by Frank, who essentially kidnaps them both. Frank's henchmen include Raymond, played by Brad Dourif, whose many memorably creepy roles include Chucky in the Child's Play films and Grima Wormtongue in the Lord of the Rings series, and Paul, played by Eraserhead star Jack Nance, who also played Pete Martell on Twin Peaks. Frank takes a terrified Jeffrey and Dorothy to the home of his business associate Ben, played by the glorious Dean Stockwell, former child star in the 1940s and well known in the late 1980s for playing the lovable hologram Al in the NBC series Quantum Leap. He also put in a memorable guest appearance on a gloriously weird episode of Miami Vice, which I urge you all to check out. Ben, who is soft-spoken yet terrifying, lip-syncs to Roy Orbison's impassioned 1963 ballad In Dreams, a song you will never again be able to listen to without thinking of this scene. Upon leaving Ben's, the group drives around recklessly before parking at an abandoned lumber mill. Frank begins to abuse Dorothy, Jeffrey punches Frank, and Frank has his goons drag Jeffrey out of the car. While In Dreams plays again, Frank kisses Jeffrey before beating him unconscious. Battered and broken, Jeffrey walks home in the morning and has himself a good cry in his childhood bedroom, which is a very sensible reaction to an absolutely horrible night. Jeffrey drops by the police station to drop off the evidence he has against Frank. He makes the unsettling discovery that the man in the yellow coat who has been working with Frank is a police detective. Jeffrey drops by Detective Williams's home instead and gives him the evidence there. Jeffrey and Sandy go to a party where they dance to Mysteries of Love and proclaim their love for each other. Mysteries of Love was written by composer Angelo Badalamenti with lyrics by Lynch and is sung by Julie Cruz. Badalamenti wrote the haunting Twin Peaks theme, Falling, which was used as an instrumental on the show, but there's also a very beautiful version with lyrics sung by Cruz. On the way home, Sandy and Jeffrey are chased by a reckless driver. Jeffrey assumes it's Frank, but it turns out to be Sandy's angry, estranged boyfriend, Mike. Mike challenges Jeffrey to a fight, but they're interrupted by the arrival of Dorothy, who shows up outside Sandy's home, naked, bruised, and disoriented. Jeffrey and Sandy hustle her inside and call an ambulance. A distraught Dorothy lets it slip that she and Jeffrey are sleeping together, and Sandy is heartbroken. Jeffrey calls Sandy from the hospital to apologize, and they reconcile. Sandy has been unable to reach her father to tell him about Dorothy because Detective Williams has been in the middle of a raid on Frank Booth's residence thanks to the evidence given to him by Jeffrey. Jeffrey stops by Dorothy's apartment and discovers two corpses, a man without an ear, who is undoubtedly Dorothy's husband, and the man with a yellow jacket. Due to the police raid, Frank is presumably wrapping up loose ends by murdering anyone who could bring him down. As Jeffrey is leaving, he spots the man with the mustache, whom we now see as Frank in disguise, coming up the stairs. Jeffrey takes the gun belonging to the detective in the yellow jacket and once again hides in the closet. A gun-toting Unloading, Frank arrives searching for Jeffrey, and when he opens the closet door, Jeffrey shoots him in the head. The film ends on a beautiful sunny day, with Jeffrey's dad home from the hospital and Jeffrey and Sandy admiring a robin who has caught a bug in its beak. Elsewhere, Dorothy reunites with her young son. Blue Velvet is an art house film, and David Lynch is very much an auteur in that his films are always an expression of his own singular vision. Lynch's vision can often take viewers to some pretty bizarre places. Everything considered, though, on the spectrum of David Lynch films, Blue Velvet has a pretty normal plot, i.e. it has a distinct beginning, middle, and end. While it has a dreamlike atmosphere that occasionally brushes up against the surreal, there's nothing in the film that defies any physical laws. It's not like many of Lynch's later works, like Mulholland Drive or Inland Empire or even Twin Peaks, in that everything that happens in Blue Velvet is within our ability to comprehend it. Because of that, and because Blue Velvet starred a pair of attractive and appealing young actors, Blue Velvet served as an excellent introduction to art house cinema for many of us young Gen Xers when it hit theaters in 1986. While Blue Velvet may have a pretty straightforward plot, there's a great deal to analyze about it. Academic tomes have been devoted to the symbolism of Blue Velvet, and film scholars have scrutinized every aspect of it. Its use of light, its use of color, its use of insects, the music choices. It's an intensely polarizing film, which is very typical for David Lynch. For every filmgoer who thinks that he is a once-in-a-lifetime genius, you will find someone who thinks his films are overrated and incoherent trash. Even though Blue Velvet is pretty accessible on the Lynchian spectrum, it can be hard to watch. Dennis Hopper's performance as Frank Booth is so committed and so angry that it almost feels like a physical attack. Molly Ringwald was the first choice to play Sandy, and her mother wouldn't let her take the role because she disliked the script so much. Isabella Rossellini was fired by her agent for accepting the role of Dorothy, and Harry Dean Stanton was a top choice to play Frank, but he turned it down because the role was too profane and violent. Blue Velvet is often considered a masterpiece, though that verdict is not unanimous. Roger Ebert famously gave it a 1-star review, and his opinion was shared by many. For the record, I am a Lynch fan. I fervently watched Twin Peaks, which contains many thematic and stylistic similarities with Blue Velvet, and I was downright giddy in 2011 when two of my great loves in life were combined when David Lynch directed a Duran Duran concert film. The result was, of course, fantastically nonsensical. Next time, I'm tackling the 1985 Brat Pack ensemble drama St. Elmo's Fire. Thank you for joining me. I hope to meet you back here then.